You don't have to save the world. Not every campaign needs to end with a god falling from the sky. In fact, if you want to run a game that's more fun, that's easier to prep, and that's more likely to end with a satisfying conclusion, you should probably think smaller, maybe a lot smaller. Now, I promise this video is going to continue to be about tabletop RPGs, but I want to take you on a little bit of a journey with me. So let's go. Story time. In 1988, my older brother and I used to ride our bikes about 2 miles down to a convenience store that was near my mom and dad's house. And when we got there, we'd buy some candy and play some video games. There, in a dimly lit corner of the store where the floor tiles didn't match, they had about 3 arcade consoles. And one of them was my brother's favorite video game, Shinobi. I can still hear the theme music from that first level. It's literally burned into my brain. Now, he loved Shinobi so much that later that year, he got a Sega Master System for Christmas. This was the first video game console that my family ever owned. Well, that's not exactly true. We had an Atari 2600, but I personally don't have a lot of memories of that system. I don't even know whose it was or where we got it or whatever happened to it. I do remember that we had a copy of the Basketball Video Computer System game program, and I remember that the ball was a square. The point is, he got a Sega for Christmas and not the vastly more popular Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, the reason he wanted the Sega was because Shinobi was being exclusively released for that console. The game would eventually come out for Nintendo a year later, and I don't know if he knew that at the time or if he even would have cared. He probably just wanted to play Shinobi at home without having to pedal to the store with a pocket full of quarters and drag his kid brother along. Today, the corner store has new owners, it has a new name, and there are no arcade consoles in the back. They've improved the lighting and they've replaced all the floor tiles. Honestly, I'd love to go back and make that ride again, buy a box of Junior Mints, and play arcade games with my older brother. But time passes, things change, and life just gets more complicated. I think that got a little too wistful. We better lighten the mood. Because no one in my life played Dungeons & Dragons, my first experience with a fantasy role-playing game was a video game. Maybe yours was too. But because my brother got a Master System instead of an NES, my first game was not The Legend of Zelda. I played this game. And since the internet didn't exist for normal people in the late 80s and the early 90s, I called it Wise the Vanished Omens for years. Don't laugh, I was like 10 years old, and there were no books at the library about the correct pronunciation of Sega Master System game titles. In the game, you play as Aaron, a young adventurer who's handy with the steel, if you know what I mean. Aaron is quested by a seer named Sarah to seek out and recover the 6 books of Ys to stop the evil sorcerer Dark Decked. This was sort of the first time in my life I had ever seen an experience points bar, or even thought about upgrading swords, or going on quests, or fighting monsters in the wilderness. This was my first RPG. The scariest part of this game was this abandoned silver mine, and in the mines you can only see as far as your torch illuminates. Sound familiar? The monsters inside were dangerous. You found the mines well before you had enough levels to compete inside. And over time, my brothers made hand-drawn maps of the entire cave system on graph paper. As a kid, I used those maps to spend as little time in the mines as possible. When I was young, I used to draw constantly. And once I played Ys, all I started drawing were dungeons and monsters. I created an entire book of hand-drawn monsters, complete with hit points and XP, and a list of their special skills. It was basically a monster manual, or a monstrous manual if you want to be second edition about it. But at that point in my life, I'd never even seen such a book before. See, I told you this video was going to be about RPGs. At the same time as I was learning about RPG video games for the first time, I was also reading a lot. And for people my age, one of the generation-defining book series were Choose Your Own Adventure books. You are a scuba diver exploring the Gulf of Mexico in search of sunken treasure. You are exploring the Underground Kingdom, a fantastic and strange world in the center of the earth. You are a private investigator searching for the lost valley of Sealing La. When your great aunt Celia decides to take off on an expedition, she leaves you in charge of her strange old house. Millionaire Harlow Thromby hired you to find out who was out to get him. But before you even got started, someone laced his bedtime brandy with arsenic, and now you have a murder case on your hands. This is the book that inspired the movie Knives Out. Here's Rian Johnson confirming my suspicion in a tweet. TSR actually had their own series of Choose Your Own Adventure books as well, these ones that are called Endless Quest books. These came out in the early 80s, and when I was a kid, I used to check these out from my local library. This one is called The Mountain of Mirrors, and it says, "You are Landon, a brave elf, on your first mission to the land of frost giants and ogres. Will you use your magic sword to fight the monsters that guard the secrets of the mountain? Will you try to rescue the prisoners that must mine the mountain or die? The thrills and challenges don't stop with your first reading, however. You can ask yourself, what if I'd done it a different way? And read the book again to find out." These are great. When I was reading these books as a kid, I had no idea what Dungeons & Dragons was, but I was about to learn. HeroQuest was released in North America in 1990, and I probably got my own copy in 1991. For me, HeroQuest finally brought everything together in a way that I had never seen before. You could play as a dwarf, an elf, a barbarian, or a wizard facing off against the evil forces of Zargon, a sorcerer who betrayed his benevolent master, Mentor, and then turned to chaos. The game featured 14 quests, each one loosely linked to fighting off Zargon's minions. Notably, Zargon is not defeated at the end of the quest book. There's a vignette that describes a major battle between the Emperor's forces and the armies of Zargon. Primarily, I think this is because they wanted your parents to buy more expansions. I got this one, The Return of the Witchlord, which was released in 1991 in North America. For me, the most important page in the quest book was this one. My mom took me down to the local library so I could make photocopies so that I could make my own dungeons. And I did. And I ran them for my friends, and it was so cool. And I knew that there could be more. The stories that I could imagine taking place in the world of HeroQuest just didn't manifest themselves at the table during play. And they didn't really fit in that dungeon either. I didn't know what to do about this, or even if anything could be done about it. So I did nothing. And things went on like that for a while. I learned about other games, including Dungeons & Dragons. And then later in high school, one of my HeroQuest friends, Levi, tried to run a session of AD&D for us. And I agreed to play, albeit somewhat reluctantly. But it was the 90s. And at that time, D&D was thought of as very uncool. You might not think that people think D&D is that cool today, but it is streets ahead of where it was 25 years ago.
Stop trying to coin the phrase streets ahead.
Does it just mean cool, or is it supposed to be like miles ahead?
You have to ask, your street's fine.
Now, to make matters worse, I don't think that anyone at the table knew any of the rules. So at the slightest mechanical question, the entire game was derailed. And this happened over and over again. I remember that I felt kind of self-conscious playing that first game. The idea of role-playing in front of my friends felt silly to me. I didn't want to do it. I just wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for that kind of game, and I didn't understand just how cool it could be. In the early 2000s, the Lord of the Rings movies exploded into the box office. As a kid, I had read The Hobbit multiple times, and to see that world laid out so beautifully on the big screen was inspiring. For me, it called back the feelings of playing HeroQuest, but with a much more intense purpose, with a singular world-saving goal. Peter Jackson had made fantasy cool for everyone, not just for nerds. He helped people understand the genre in a way that just didn't seem possible before. All of a sudden, references to Elrond and Frodo were commonplace, and they were being made by nerds and non-nerds alike. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe more people were nerds than we realized, and they just needed someone to invite them to take part. A few years later, I was checking out books at Goodwill, and I came across this book for 99 cents. This is the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition Arms and Equipment Guide. And this is the first D&D book that I ever owned. This book was a catalyst for me. I had no idea how this game was played, but every single page had artwork, detailed descriptions of armor, weapons, or medieval clothing, and on page 64 is one of the coolest pieces of fantasy art I had ever seen. It's a Death Knight riding a black armored steed, flanked by 2 skeletal riders. That picture is an adventure all by itself. The first time I saw it, I immediately wanted to know, who is this guy? What does he want? And what is the significance of that golden amulet around his neck? That is not something that you wear into combat on accident. I never read this whole book. I didn't need to. My imagination took over, and I started thinking about how cool this game must be. Now, I was ready. It was 2008, and I decided to find a D&D group. I was in college studying computer science, and so I was surrounded by nerds every day. A few of us got together to play D&D, and that group has been playing together ever since. Actually, that's not true. That group basically fell apart immediately. It turned out we were just not compatible gamers, but I knew that I still wanted to play. I had a vision in my head of what I thought it would be like to play Dungeons & Dragons, and I wanted to realize that vision. In the end, I bought the 3-book set for 4th edition, I read the books, and I taught myself how to play Dungeons & Dragons. I found a group of 4 or 5 willing friends, and I taught them all how to play as well. We had one set of dice. We had one player's handbook, a few miniatures, and we played around a coffee table in my tiny apartment. My first game was an entirely homebrew 4th edition D&D campaign. No one in my group had ever played before, and I had no tabletop RPG mentors to show me the way. In 2008, there was no Critical Role, there was no Dimension 20, there were just a handful of episodes of a podcast that Wizards of the Coast and Penny Arcade recorded, and I listened to them over and over and over again. YouTube at that time was only 3 years old, and its catalog was really limited compared to what we have today. No one was coming to save me. I had to learn how to do it on my own. Inspired by The Lord of the Rings and the 80-hour RPGs of the 8 and 16-bit console era, I drew a map, and I came up with a storyline about saving the world. A fallen wizard of Ion's 5th house and an evil priest of Vecna conspired to combine knowledge and secrets stolen from their gods in order to become immortal, thus thwarting the Raven Queen's attempt to gather the souls of the dead. Simultaneously, the party was framed for a political assassination of the ambassadors from 5 city-states of Arendor, which were attempting to unify the island into a federation. Now, this made being in the city dangerous, but the party would find no sanctuary in the wilds. For an immortal Knoll warrior, his mind, long since lost to madness, stalked the wilderness, hungry for blood. This was pretty heavy stuff. Not only was the political situation complex and unstable, but the gods were quarreling over the scope of their portfolios. And I asked my level 1 party to deal with it. They did fine. And we had a blast playing. We never did resolve the central tension of that campaign. And after a year or so, I had graduated college and I moved to take a job in another state. For all intents and purposes, virtual tabletops did not exist in 2009 and Discord wasn't around either. So my old group disbanded. I met some new nerds and I invited them to play Dungeons & Dragons. And I ran the same campaign for them. Now, it came out differently, but the major plot points were the same. Through it all, I was running the governments of 5 independent kingdoms, generating minions and lieutenants for Ioun, Vecna, and the Raven Queen, each with their own goals and motivations. I was ensuring my sessions had a nice mix of RP, exploration, and 2 or 3 combat encounters, and attempting to cater to the backstories of each of my players. The story I was trying to tell was intricate, and the scale was huge. For me, that translated into hours and hours of game prep. Probably 6 to 8 hours of prep for a 4-hour session, maybe more. Now, I loved running that campaign, but over weeks and months, it became exhausting. My players would find inconsistencies in the story, and some of the threads began to unravel. It was just so much work, and I ended up getting burnt out. Eventually, after about a year, we reached a nice narrative stopping point and ended it. I promised we would come back to that storyline, but we never did. I still have secrets in my head about NPCs in that campaign that have never come to light, and maybe they never will, and that sucks. I'm lucky enough to have a couple other game masters in my group, the kind of guys who are willing to take a turn behind the screen to let me recharge. And I've seen this cycle repeat a number of times, not just for me, but also for them. You get this really cool idea, you run a campaign for 6 months or a year, you burn out, and then you take a break while someone else takes the wheel. This is not totally abnormal, and I don't even know if it's bad, but it makes me wonder if there's a better way. Back in 2010 or maybe 2011, when I had just finished running my second year-long campaign, I was talking about this with my friend Dan, one of the other game masters in my group, and I said, why don't we just run smaller adventures? I'm not talking about one-shots. I mean like a real story that has a beginning, middle, and an end that lasts maybe 3 to 6 sessions. Something with a manageable scope. Something with a very focused goal for the players. I described them to him at that time as episodes or seasons of a long-running TV show. At the time, I was a relatively new DM, and to me, this was a novel idea. Maybe one of the best RPG ideas I ever had. In fact, it was such a good idea that it was already thought of by many other people over the course of the previous 40 or 50 years. These old, small adventures already existed. This one's The Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh. This one is The Tomb of the Lizard King. This one is Against the Cult of the Reptile God. This idea had been around forever, but because I'd never heard of it, it seemed fresh and new to me. And that's because movies and video games and even modern adventure products like this one, Vecna, Eve of Ruin, are these huge world-saving adventures. And that trend is not limited to Wizards of the Coast products. Heliana's Guide to Monsters is a 600-page third-party campaign and setting published by Loot Tavern. Paizo's Kingmaker is a chonky 640 pages. For most DMs, something that big is insane. Running a large published adventure, the kind that's intended to take your characters through like 10 or 15 levels, is an immense amount of work. Eve of Ruin is basically WotC's Avengers Infinity War. In this one adventure, the party will meet Mordenkainen, Lady Illustrial Silverhand, Tasha of Tasha's Hideous Laughter, Kaz the Bloody-Handed, Vecna, Strahd von Zarovich, and a weird version of a Sararak, and maybe Tiamat? You'll also travel to Neverwinter on the Sword Coast. You'll go to Sigil. You'll go on board a Spelljammer in the Astral Plane. You'll visit Eberron. You'll travel to Barovia. You'll be in Greyhawk. You'll visit the Chaotic Plane, and you'll go to Avernus or Avernus, however you want to pronounce that. You will go everywhere, and you will meet everyone. This adventure is big. I think it's too big. Is there even room in there for a plucky bard from Waterdeep to get a little screen time? Asking for a friend. To be clear, I think Eve of Ruin is a really cool adventure, and it features some of my favorite characters from D&D lore, some of my favorite artifacts, including, I don't think I should say that, it might be a spoiler. One of my favorite artifacts is in here, and it's the whole purpose of the whole quest. If you know what it is, you know it's sick. And also some really cool places in Dungeons & Dragons. But I will never, ever, ever run this. And Wizards doesn't care. Like, I already bought it. And I bought it because it'd be cool to read. They crunched the numbers and they found out that making a big 250-page book like this is more financially viable than making little adventures like these. Now, I believe that the creative team at Wizards loves D&D, and I believe that they want to make fun products. Simultaneously, they're a business, and that means that they have goals which are not related to making sure that the product you receive is as usable and as fun as it could possibly be. They have that goal too, but they have other goals. They have constraints that prevent them from focusing primarily on the goal of generating fun at your table. Because products have to be profitable. As they say, if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. Wizards of the Coast and other large publishers, they can't afford to make these smaller stories, apparently. But there's a massive market of high-quality, smaller-scale adventures out there. Plus, 50 years of classic modules, some of them better than others. I'm always surprised when I see people discussing old school play or talking about creating a campaign of smaller scale adventures like this. Invariably, somebody says, well, yeah, but you can't do that and have good storytelling. Says who? Well, everybody on the internet. But I think everybody on the internet is wrong. I recently just finished our fourth and final session of The Sinister Secret of Peacock Point, an adventure in this book, Wyvern Songs by Brad Kerr. The setup presented a mystery that could only be resolved by traveling the wilds and exploring a dungeon below the lighthouse. There were moments of exploration and combat, two things that dungeon crawls do really, really well. And then something curious happened. 3 characters were downed by the baddest monster in that dungeon, and we watched intently as the cleric frantically struggled to save them. 2 of my player characters died, and there's a whole spoiler-riddled video that you can go watch if you want to know more about that scenario. This stressful tactical scenario yielded some really great role-playing and some cool character building. And my players, prepared for the possibility that they might lose a character, had a really cool story-driven way to introduce their new characters. It was kind of awesome, and frankly, we all kind of like the new characters better than the old ones anyway. That's something that I think most people might say you can't find in a dungeon crawl. But I'm telling you, most people, you can. It's there if you want it. And the good news is, at least Peacock Point is safe once more. Well, actually, that's not true. Technically, the party absconded with the loot and left the dungeon to the immortal fiend that was inadvertently released by the Thieves Guild there. That'll probably never come up again. Now, Peacock Point is an adventure that stands entirely on its own, but it doesn't have to. This could be a jumping off point to much more adventure in the region. While exploring the Thieves Guild beneath the lighthouse, our cleric found a map to the tomb of a long-forgotten knight named Sir Galen. I texted that player a scroll as if it were a letter from the town archivist, explaining that they'd never heard of the tomb, but that symbol on the map that the cleric found was located in the local village cemetery. The mayor reached out to the seer and asked, is it safe to send a new lighthouse keeper to Peacock Point, or will they be consumed by the monster that lurks below? The thief got wind that a rival adventuring party was off on some damn fool mission at the local tavern. And the reeve of a nearby town heard of the party's good deeds and sent a letter to the party's wizard requesting aid. My players have an entire world with plenty of choices for adventure, and I'm going to let them choose from any of those hooks that I've dangled in front of them. There is no destination. There's only the journey. In Eve of Ruin, you could drop in any level appropriate party, and the story would progress in pretty much the same way. That is to say, when your adventure is so big, it can make your characters feel small. When your PCs travel from fantastic place to fantastic place and they never stay anywhere long enough, then the NPC relationships they develop don't really matter. Because Eve of Ruin is so much bigger than your characters, Eve of Ruin is the main character. And look, I don't blame the writers of the adventure for that. All of my early, long-running campaigns were the exact same way. And over the years, I've gotten better and better about reducing the scope of things, trying to be more flexible with how the story plays second fiddle to the players. I still have a lot more to learn, of course, but that's what's so great about this hobby. And it's why I'm only going to run small adventures for a while. I'm going to go and learn about that. Matt Colville has a whole video about this same topic. He says, players want a sense of finishing something, not just a chapter, a whole adventure. Done. And that's what small adventures get you. You can finish them. You feel like you did something. And you know what happens when everyone at the table finishes a short, fun adventure? They want to play again. It's my best impression of Matt. It's not very good. I'll put a link to his video down in this video's description, and I do recommend that you watch it. It's excellent. You don't need to write or even read a 600-page epic to tell a story that your players are going to remember. Sometimes just one dungeon, one mystery, and one map found in a lighthouse is enough. Let your players finish something, and then let them finish something else. Let them feel like the heroes of their own story without saving the whole world. Guys, hit me up with your comments down below, and I will answer as many of them as I possibly can. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.